July 2026, Manila Bay, a gray-hulled unmanned surface vessel idles at a Philippine Navy pier, its sensor mast sweeping the horizon. No crew, no missile. And yet the Pentagon just paid for a small fleet of them, with the attack variant scheduled for 2027. The hull is new, the Doctrine is not. That Doctrine was written 8,000 kilometers away, in the Black Sea, by a country that in 2022 did not have a navy worth naming. A Magura V7 costs somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000. A Russian Karakurt corvette costs $70 to $90 million. A Grigorovich-class frigate runs north of $400 million. By minute 9, we will show you how that gap, the one Ukraine built its naval war on, has become the official Pacific export product of the United States government. First, the sentence USNI News published in July 2026 that Moscow will spend years trying to unsay. The report is short and specific. The U.S. Asymmetric Aid Program, the same Pentagon office that has been pushing counter-drone kit and coastal ISR into Kyiv since 2023, has begun transferring unmanned surface vessels to the Philippine Navy. Non-lethal variants first. Reconnaissance, decoys, forward sensors. Attack variants are scheduled for 2027. Here is the line that matters. The program is built, in USNI's own wording, on the naval drone doctrine Ukraine proved in the Black Sea. Not inspired by it, not adjacent to it, built on it. That is the U.S. Department of Defense putting into a procurement document what Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the HUR, and the 73rd Naval Special Operations Center have been saying with hulls and payloads for 3 years. A fleet does not have to be big. It has to be uncatchable. To understand why a bay in Luzon is suddenly a Ukrainian story, go back to the water off Sevastopol. In February 2022, the Russian Black Sea Fleet was the reason Odessa held its breath. Roughly 50 combat-capable hulls, per open-source hull tracking data aggregated by CSIS and independent analysts like H.I. Sutton, sitting inside a bastion the Kremlin had spent a decade calling untouchable. By summer 2026, per the same public tracking, that number is down to something around 11 working combatants, almost all of them east of 37 degrees east, behind the Kerch Line, in Novorossiysk, in Feodosia, in anchorages the fleet used to treat as rear areas. A navy that cannot leave port is not defending a sea. It is hiding from one. And it did not lose that sea to a bigger navy. It lost it to a boat that costs less than a used pickup truck in Kyiv, guided by a laptop and a Starlink dish. The first factor is the asymmetry itself, and it is why every foreign navy is now on the phone. A Magura V7, per Defense Express reporting and public HER reveals, is a low-signature unmanned surface vessel, roughly 6 meters, a warhead in the 250 to 320 kilogram range, an operational radius of 400 to 900 kilometers, depending on payload and sea state, and a unit cost somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000. A Sea Baby, the parallel platform run by Ukraine's security service and refined into the Mark V generation, is bigger, carries more warhead, and, this is the part Moscow keeps trying not to talk about, can be networked. Now the other side of the ledger. The Karakurt-class corvette Askold hit at the Zalev shipyard in Kerch in November 2023 and confirmed damaged by satellite imagery across Reuters, Militarnyi, and CSIS analysis was a $70 to $90 million hull. The Magura-class landing ship Caesar Kunikov sunk off Alupka in February 2024 in the operation the HUR credited to Group 13, and a Magura swarm, was a midline amphibious platform, but her cargo and her role in the Crimea logistics loop made her worth many multiples of what killed her. Grigorovich-class frigates sit above $400 million each. Put the two numbers next to each other, and the argument writes itself. $300,000. $400 million. That is not a battle. That is an exchange rate. Keep that ratio in mind, because it is what the Pentagon just bought. The second factor is the transfer itself, and the details matter. Per USNI News, and consistent with prior Reuters and Atlantic Council reporting on the Asymmetric Aid Program's Pacific pivot, the USVs already delivered to the Philippine Navy mirror the Magura-class mission profile. Same range band, same warhead capacity band, autonomous swarm coordination, multiple hulls converging on a target from separate bearings, the exact tactic that killed the Sergei Kotov off Crimea in March 2024, is on the delivery roadmap. That is not a coincidence of engineering. That is a doctrine being cloned, hull by hull, and shipped to a partner navy whose problem is not identical to Ukraine's, but is structurally the same. Ukraine faced a numerically superior surface fleet in a semi-enclosed sea with predictable choke points. The Philippines faces a numerically superior surface fleet, the People's Liberation Army Navy, in a semi-enclosed sea with predictable choke points. Sevastopol, meet the second Thomas Shoal, the doctrine ports. That is the whole point. The Kremlin's line on all of this has been consistent, and it has been wrong for 3 years. TASS, in coverage repeated to the Duma and echoed on state television, has called naval drones a terrorist tactic with no future in real war. A nuisance, an improvisation, something serious navies do not plan for. That was the official line in autumn 2023, after the first strikes on Sevastopol. It was the official line in spring 2024, after the fleet was quietly ordered east. It was still the official line in summer 2025, after the Black Sea Fleet's out-of-port operational tempo had dropped by a figure CSIS analysts put in the high 70s as a percent. And it is being repeated in 2026, while the U.S. Department of Defense signs procurement paperwork that treats the tactic as the future of Pacific Sea denial. You cannot call a weapon a nuisance and then watch the world's largest defense budget buy it as a doctrine. Or rather, you can. You just cannot expect anyone outside your own studio audience to believe you. Before we go further, a reminder you're watching Fury Military. We break down this war system by system, hull by hull, every week. The one's mainstream coverage skips because the story isn't in a headline, it's in a procurement line. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now the third factor, and this is the one Moscow understands least. The third factor is the return loop, and it is what turns a Ukrainian tactical program into a Ukrainian strategic asset. Every dollar the Pentagon spends on Philippine USVs is a validation dollar for Ukraine's naval program. Congress renews what works. When the Asymmetric Aid Program's Pacific line item goes to a House Armed Services Committee markup in 2027, the sentence that carries it will read something like, "This platform family has been combat-proven in a contested maritime theater against a peer surface fleet." That sentence exists because of the HER. It exists because of the 73rd Naval SOF. It exists because a country that in February 2022 did not have a blue water navy took a class of expendable hulls and, in Defense Express's phrasing, turned the Black Sea into a museum of what a big fleet looks like when it is afraid of small boats. That is not just Ukrainian tactics being exported. That is Ukrainian tactical credibility becoming a line of the U.S. defense budget. And a line of the U.S. defense budget funds the next Magura generation. The loop closes. Kyiv proves. Washington buys. Washington's buying funds Kyiv's next iteration. Moscow watches and repeats the same line about terrorists on the news. Which brings us to the fourth factor, and the honesty hedge that goes with it. The scale of what happened in the Black Sea is documented, but the exact hull count matters, and different sources give different numbers. The figures on fleet posture, the roughly 50 combatants in early 2022, the roughly 11 working today, east of 37 degrees east, come from open-source hull tracking. That community is good and transparent about its methods, and it gets things right that state agencies get wrong. But it is not the U.S. Navy's classified surface picture. Treat these as claims consistent with the direction, not gospel on the magnitude. The direction, however, is not in dispute. ISW, in weekly assessments across 2024 and 2025, tracked a documented redeployment of major Black Sea Fleet assets east of the Kerch Strait. Reuters and the Kyiv Independent reported the port shift to Novorossiysk in real time. The Moscow Times, quoting Russian shipyard sources, reported the maintenance backlog pinning surviving hulls in port for months. The magnitude is a claim. The retreat is a fact. And the retreat is what the Pentagon is copying. Now the machine, because none of this works unless you understand what it actually does. A Magura-class attack profile, reconstructed from open-source footage across HER release channels, Militarnyi's tactical breakdowns, and the CSIS naval drone tracker, runs something like this. First, a reconnaissance UAV, often a fixed-wing platform at altitude, locates the target and passes a bearing and rough position through a Starlink-based command link. Second, a lead Magura, running low in the water with a minimized radar cross-section, moves onto the bearing. Third, and this is the piece that broke the fleet's tactical assumptions, The swarm converges on multiple headings at once. A Russian corvette's close-in weapon system, typically the AK-630, is a 6-barreled 30mm gun on a mount that traverses fast but cannot service two bearings simultaneously. Ukraine did not defeat the AK-630 with technology. It defeated it with geometry. 4 hulls on 4 bearings, closing at high speed. From separations the mount cannot cover twice inside its own reload cycle. The launcher does not need to see every drone. It needs a bearing, a priority, and a window the mount cannot cover. And once one hull is inside terminal range, the corvette's fate is not decided by the corvette. It is decided by whichever operator, sitting behind a laptop that may be 600 kilometers away, has the cleanest video feed. That is the doctrine the Pentagon just bought. There is a detail in the USNI reporting that has not gotten enough attention. The non-lethal Philippine variants already delivered are being used for reconnaissance and forward sensing. That is not a downgrade. That is the front half of the exact kill chain we just walked through. A reconnaissance USV in the 2nd Thomas Shoal area of operations is not a lesser weapon. It is the sensor that makes the attack variant work when it arrives. Ukraine's own program went through the same sequence. Sensor first, striker second, swarm third. Manila is on the Doctrine curve. The curve was drawn in Odessa. Push through the swarm and take losses, or scatter and lose the target picture? If you're a Karakurt captain at anchor in Novorossiysk in summer 2026, tell us in the comments what you would actually do. Because the fleet's own doctrine, per Russian naval writing leaked to and analyzed by Dossier Spiona and the Moscow Times, still has not answered that question honestly. The zoom out matters. The Philippine deal is not the only tell. Reuters, in early 2026, reported preliminary conversations between Taiwanese defense planners and their U.S. counterparts on the same platform family. The Atlantic Council, in a spring policy brief, argued explicitly that the Ukrainian naval drone model, cheap, expendable, sensor-networked, doctrinally simple, is the single most exportable Ukrainian innovation of the war, not the FPV, not the deep strike drone, the USV, because the geography of a semi-enclosed sea with a numerically superior adversary is not a Ukrainian problem. It is a Baltic problem. It is a Taiwan Strait problem. It is a South China Sea problem. And the platform that solves it was refined, in real combat, by a country whose navy in 2022 was a coastal patrol force with ambitions. This is what sensor-driven asymmetric warfare looks like when it stops being an experiment and becomes an export. Mass alone no longer wins the sea. A 50-hull fleet that cannot leave port is not a fleet. It is a target list with a mailing address. And the sentence Moscow keeps repeating, that this tactic has no future in real war, is being proven wrong in real time by the world's largest defense budget writing checks for the tactic. That is the piece the Kremlin cannot spin, because the check is not being written by Kyiv. It is being written by Washington, and it is being cashed in Manila. The Russian Ministry of Defense has not, at time of writing, publicly commented on the Philippine transfer. State media coverage on Rossiya 1 and RT, sampled through the Astra and Exilanova Plus monitoring channels, has stuck to the older framing. Western unmanned platforms are unproven. Russian air defense and naval assets have adapted. The Black Sea situation is stable. Compare that to what the Moscow Times has been reporting on Russian shipyard capacity and what Militarnyi has been documenting from Novorossiysk satellite passes, hulls and extended maintenance, missing air defense modules, delayed refits. The official line and the satellite picture are not in the same book. They are not in the same library. And Moscow, at some point in 2027, will have to explain to its own naval command why the tactic its television calls terrorism is being trained on by Philippine crews with U.S. instructors and Ukrainian doctrinal handbooks. Here is the part propaganda cannot cover. Ukraine, in 3.5 years, changed what a navy is. Not by building a bigger one, by building a smaller one, faster, cheaper, and more networked, and by proving, hull by hull, footage by footage, sinking by sinking, that the 20th century surface fleet becomes a museum piece if you do not adapt. The Sergei Kotov, the Caesar Kunikov, the Askold. These are not just sinkings. They are the empirical dataset a Pentagon procurement office cited when it wrote the Philippine transfer order. Ukraine's naval program is now part of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base's evidence file. That is not a metaphor. That is a footnote. So what does this actually cost Russia's Black Sea Fleet? It cost the fleet its last remaining strategic function. Not its ships, those were already largely displaced. Its identity. A fleet that has retreated from its own home port, that operates east of the Kerch Line, that runs its remaining sorties under drone defense procedures written specifically because of Ukraine, is a fleet that has become a case study. Naval war colleges will be teaching what happened to it for a generation. And they will be teaching it using Ukrainian doctrine, translated into the operational language of whichever navy is footing the tuition. Can a navy that cannot leave its own home port still call itself a fleet? Can a doctrine that Moscow's television calls terrorism and Washington's Pentagon calls procurement survive as an official line for another 6 months? And when the Philippine attack variant lands in 2027, and a mirror of the Magura tactic converges on a target in a different sea, who gets credit for the doctrine? The country that paid for it, or the country that proved it? Tell us in the comments. And if you want the system-by-system breakdown of what's coming next, the Baltic USV programs, the Taiwanese conversations, the specific next-generation Magura, the Hur is quietly developing behind Odessa, subscribe. We cut a segment on the Baltic angle for length. Drop the word Baltic in the comments if you want that as the next episode. The point of this analysis isn't to celebrate destruction, but to understand the military and strategic realities behind it, because the clearer we see how modern war is being reshaped, in the Black Sea and now beyond it, the clearer the value of deterrence, allied cooperation, and a just, durable peace becomes.